I'm not quite ready to start talking. You got 4 more minutes. I usually give my board 1 minute to finish out. You got 4. All right, at this time, I call to order the joint school board meeting between the following school corporations: Benton Community School Corporation, Carroll Consolidated School Corporation, Delphi Community School Corporation, Eastern Flasky Community School Corporation, North Newton School Corporation, North White School Corporation, Pioneer Regional School Corporation, Tri-County School Corporation. I'd like to recognize the following school corporations who have representation at tonight's meeting, including Frontier School Corporation, Kankakee Valley School Corporation, Rensselaer Central School Corporation, Twin Lakes School Corporation, and the West Central School Corporation. I hope I didn't miss anybody because I heard myself coming from the back of the room. At this time, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next, we will go through the roll call. I am going to start with the North White School Board. So if we start standing, or they don't have to stand, but state your name.
Scott Denton. Scott Williams.
And I'm Jim White, President of the school board. So we do have all members accounted for. Thank you. Benton Community School Corporation.
Jennifer Barks. Chloe Jones.
Chris Stoll.
And I guess at this time I also need you have a quorum. Okay, thank you. Carroll Consolidated.
Kyle Wagner, Eric Johnson,
Amanda Redmond.
Ryan Hall.
And do we have a quorum?
Yes.
Thank you. Delphi Community School Corporation.
Kirk Forstall, Gil Smith, Chris Nipple, Mike Priest, Zachary Owen, Tim Strasser.
And do we have a quorum? Eastern Pulaski Community School Corporation.
Tim Rouse, Jimmy Terry,
Beth Ruff.
Aaron Campbell. Joe Cunningham.
Ross Ryder.
And we have a quorum. Thank you. North Newton School Corporation.
Patricia Reyes, board president. Tiffany Cox. And then we also have Vice President Paul Sheldon, Diane Johnsey, and Samantha Pickle on virtual on our computer, so we have a quorum.
Have a quorum. Thank you. Pioneer Regional School Corporation.
Chriselle Pearson,
Jenny Hurd.
Chandra Felker, Lisa Kessler.
And do we have a quorum?
Yes, we do.
Thank you. Tri-County School Corporation.
Bob Diller, Spencer Gay,
Don Campbell.
Randy Chevron.
And a quorum?
yes.
Yes, we do. Thank you. This time, I'd like to introduce the North White School Corporation Superintendent, Nick Eccles, who will give a welcome and introduce our speaker.
A little shorter than him. I would like to welcome everyone to tonight's joint school board meeting. I want to thank each superintendent for working quickly to get board members who could commit to being here tonight. I know given more time that we would have had more school boards with quorums. Tonight's an incredible night. We're coming together to represent 7 different counties in Midwest Indiana. We have a total of 13 school corporations with administrative and school board representatives here tonight. At no other time has this many school boards from this many counties joined together for a meeting. This is a statement to all of public educators across the state that although we are individual, we are all still one. Tonight, board members, you will be asked to comment and vote on 3 bills which are in legislation. Each of these bills takes away in some fashion from public education. These bills are set up to incentivize parents and provide scholarships to attract our students across Indiana into private and charter schools. Some may ask why we are here tonight meeting about these bills, as many of us don't have private or charter schools in our districts or even close to our districts. My response is simple. Any of us can have a charter or private school move into our districts at any time, which could greatly cripple our budgets. The issue is that the state is diverting funds from public education to pay for these vouchers and or scholarships. And in many schools across our state, students are leaving public education, which causes those schools to lose funding and oftentimes reduce staff or programs for their students. I believe that most of you get ISBA's daily news. Over the past couple of weeks, many districts have approved resolutions very similar to what you will vote on tonight to show opposition to these bills. However, each school doing so individually doesn't make the same impact of what we are doing here tonight. In conclusion, tonight we come together in solidarity to not only let our fellow school districts across the state know that we are in this together, but to also let our legislators know that we are opposed to these bills and any bills which take away from public education. Our school districts, not only in Midwest Indiana, but throughout the entire state, will continue to communicate and work together to do whatever we can to provide the best education for our public educated students. At this time, I'd like to introduce our guest speaker, and I would like to point out one interesting fact. Our guest speaker actually began his teaching career right here at North White. It is my pleasure to introduce the Executive Director of the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents, Dr. J.T. Koopman.
Before I begin, I want to point out an article that I just located right before I walked out the door this evening. And maybe some of you have heard of Michael Hicks. He's an economist that's written widely on education and education issues in the state of Indiana. He's with Ball State University. Some of the things that I see from Michael Hicks I agree with, some I don't. But this one I happen to. And if you have a chance to look it up, its report makes it clear we spend far too little on education, including teacher pay. And it's kind of an interesting take from an economist's point of view about the value of education and people in education and what it does for the economy in each and every state. So if you have a chance, take a look at that. I want to echo the sentiments that were offered by Mr. Eccles and Mr. Smith. Really appreciate North White and the North White administration, including Mr. Eccles and Mr. Greg Riles, for arranging this tonight. This really came together, I think, in a conversation from last Wednesday. So to be here on Monday with that conversation taking place on Wednesday is rather short of a miracle. So thank you all for being here. I want to thank all of our superintendents that are here with their boards. I think we have some teachers and some principals in the audience. I want to thank you also for being here and thank the media for covering this event. So thank you all for that. In addition to me essentially starting my teaching career at North White, and I'll get into that here in just a second. I also want to point out that my wife, right here in the front row, is a Viking graduate. So I won't necessarily say what year, but she is a proud North White graduate. So thank you. Just to give you a little bit of background on me, I'm actually somewhat of a local boy. I grew up in Brookston, Indiana, and my grandpa and my father both had businesses in Brookston. And so I was a Brookston bomber. And when we moved from Brookston at the end of my 7th grade year, that was the year prior to the consolidation between Brookston and Chalmers for Frontier School Corporation to be formed. So I'll let you all do the math on that on your own. We moved to Lafayette, and I graduated from Lafayette, Jeff, and then went on to Purdue. And one of my favorite stories is that my dad said that I could go wherever I wanted to go to college, but if he was going to pay for it, it was going to be Purdue. So after I graduated from Purdue, I accepted my first teaching position in Northern Indiana, waiting on my fiance to finish her senior year at Purdue. And then I got a call from a good friend from Purdue, and he asked me to come and teach and coach at a place called North White. So we were here for a couple of years coaching football and basketball, teaching language arts and phys ed and health. And this was a great place to be. I enjoyed many personal relationships, professional relationships, and great kids in the time that I was here. So I just appreciated that. Following that, I went to graduate school at Indiana University in school administration and started pursuing my administrative career. And then I became an assistant principal for 7 years. Then I was a principal for 5 years. And then I was a superintendent for 22 years after that. I was a full-time college professor in ed administration. I was an adjunct professor in ed administration. I worked for a K-12 technology company for a couple of years. And then I accepted this position as the executive director of the Indiana Association of Public School Superintendents. The reason I kind of bring all of that full circle is those of us that are in education, we do it for the passion that we have for kids, educating kids, having a well-educated citizenry, which, by the way, is the very fabric of our democracy. Public education is what created this country and what we continue to stand for in this country. Without high-quality public schools, our democracy is going to crumble. And that's one of the reasons I continue to follow that passion and do what I do, advocating for you at the State House. And it's not an easy job. Oftentimes, it falls on deaf ears. They definitely have an agenda that they want to follow. It's a national agenda, I might add. And if you have not heard about a group called ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, and it is a extremely powerful group that is driving a lot of policy in this country, not just education, but a lot of other policy in this country. And it's primarily as a result of anything that will benefit their pocketbooks. And so I kind of see this as what's happening with education. Education is a large portion of every state's budget. There's a lot of money at stake, and a lot of people want to get their hands on it. So Indiana's Constitution charge is to provide by law for general and uniform system of common schools wherein tuition shall not be charged and equally and open to all. Now, as I look at the landscape today, that's not necessarily the case. I think that's what our founding forefathers had in mind. And I think that's what many people had in mind up until a couple of years ago. And I've been doing this long enough that there was a point in time when I would talk with legislators about education issues, and they would look at me and go, that's not our deal. That's local school boards. That's what they're hired and elected, or not hired. That's what they're elected to do, is develop education policy for their community. How we've gone so far afield is absolutely baffling to me. I also recall hearing a story back in 1991, and I can't remember who said it or where I was, but I'll never forget it. And that is the fact that there's a group of people that said we will have a member on every school board in America to start dictating our educational policy. That was in 1991. And whether it be on school boards or whether they become elected officials, I've kind of seen that happen. And what started out as a drip and then kind of got into a little bit of a more of a heavy flow is now become a river. And they've gotten their way, and they will continue to get their way until the public speaks up and says enough is enough. And people are busy. They're just trying to live their lives, raise their family, put food on the table and a roof over their head. And they don't have time to pay attention, especially to all the little nuances that are happening at the State House. And it's a very, very busy place, lots of bills. It's a mountain of information to get through. And so even with the education bills that we have, it's still very difficult to keep up with. And at the end of a session, the bills that don't pass, and I'm going to mention one here in just a minute, may resurface at the end of a session in coattail legislation. And that's tough to keep track of. And if they want to insert it, and I'll just use the budget bill as an example, the budget's going to pass. It has to. But if they insert some other things in the budget bill and nobody pays attention or nobody sees it, it's going to pass. So that's just the nature of what we deal with at the State House. Now, I will always say that funding education is a pretty tricky thing to do because not all school districts look the same, have the same needs, and it's very difficult to make any comparison between school corporations. And if you just take a look at the school corporations in here and try to compare what you have, what you don't have, your budgets, your staffing, they all look different. They all look different. And they look different because every school district has different needs and different priorities. And that's the way it should be. We're never going to have equality in funding just because of that, of the nature of that. So we see our funding formulas changing almost every biennium as a result of that. So attempting to find equality in funding in Indiana schools is really just a constantly moving target. And every 2 years, you're going to see something different. So let's take a look at some of the recent events affecting schools in Indiana. In 2008-9, and again, that was in the midst of an economic meltdown, Indiana was looking for ways to maintain revenue and balance the state budget. Well, the state has to balance their budget just like we have to, as school districts, have to balance our budget. And it has to be balanced by the end of December, every year, regardless. So they asked Indiana school districts to balance the state budget, what I will refer to as on the backs of Indiana school-age children. And that's when we had a $350 million cut that came down to us on December 10th. Now we had the following 12 months to find out how we were going to deal with that budget shortfall in 12 months and get our budgets balanced by the next December. I'm looking around the room, and I know some of you were around then. Some of you can tell us precisely what that looked like for you and what you did. Now, I had a $60 million budget when I was superintendent. So that's $6 million that I had to find somewhere to get my budget balanced. And you all know the major portion of any budget, any school budget, is personnel and benefits. Now, think back, we had a general fund then and 4 other funds along with our general fund. So it's a little bit different today than it was then, but that's the way it was then. But you couldn't transfer dollars between those funds. So the general fund was the primary fund that was affected. And so we had to think in terms of personnel and benefits to find that $6 million. Now, the district that I was in at that point in time, we were scrambling because we knew that programs were near and dear to many hearts in that community and in that district, and we didn't want to see programs cut. So how could we stay away from the classroom, and what were we going to look at to make those kind of cuts? Well, you can't find everything in custodians and secretaries and instructional assistants. There's just not enough money there. So then you have to start looking at programs and people. And so in my particular case, we did a lot of community forums to find out what people liked, what they didn't like, and where they would be comfortable making cuts. Well, guess what? Nobody was comfortable making any cuts because that program my kid is in, that program my kid is in, that program I was in, and nobody was comfortable making those decisions. So that comes back to who? The superintendent of the school board. So we had many hours of discussion over these community forums about what we were going to do. And so what's the easy answer? And it's not an easy answer, I assure you, is putting together a referendum. And so my board at that particular point in time wanted to take a vote on a referendum in May to be held in the following November. I said, that's not enough time. We cannot do that. We can't get it organized in that amount of time. And so any of you that have talked about referendums or studied referendums, it takes 12 to 18 months to organize an effective referendum campaign. So that didn't give us a lot of time, but the urgency was apparent. And so they voted in July to have the referendum, and I did not see a school up until after November of that year because I was out campaigning 7 days a week in any place that would let me in and let me talk about the need for the referendum in that particular school district. It's hard work. It is a heavy lift. It takes a focused effort. And if you don't know it, a referendum campaign is not necessarily about education. It's a political campaign. And you have to have a political message that you campaign with, just like politicians do. And so education, quality education in each one of your districts means that you can attract business, means that homeowners are happy with their home values because of the quality of the schools. What's the first thing a realtor will tell you when they're showing clients around? We have high quality schools. And if you let them deteriorate, those high quality schools and those home values are going to go away. People are going to move away. And then you have a whole other set of circumstances when you start losing kids. So education is of paramount importance to each and every one of you. And I don't want you all to have to do referendums, but when all of this funding noise started, if you talk to a legislator, their answer is going to be, we'll hold a referendum. That was not the answer too many years ago. But Indiana is now a referendum state. It's not a matter of if you're going to do a referendum, it's a matter of when. And that's pretty much true across the board. So that's kind of the situation that we're in now. And of course, our funding buckets, and right here's a good source for that, with the charter schools, the virtual charter schools, choice scholarships, educational savings account, all of that sort of thing puts a hole in that funding bucket, and it just drains it into diverts it into different areas. And we continue to thin out the education funding pie, and it's going to be difficult for any entity to continue to survive. But 92% of the kids in the state of Indiana attend public schools. Why are we diverting money away from the majority of kids? That doesn't make any sense to me. And so we also had situations, as you may recall, where we changed the way that we fund schools in the state of Indiana. And there was a point in time where we were partially funded in the general fund with property taxes and partially funded by tuition support. Well, they took away the property tax entity for how we funded the general fund. And that was a good way for us to balance our budget and also seek our taxpayers' support without doing a referendum, because they had to support that property tax levy. And so they changed how we did things. And I'll mention the fact that assessed valuation is one of those entities of equity that really didn't exist, because you could have, and I'm thinking of several school districts where their assessed value was huge. So they could raise a lot of money with very little tax rate. And then there are several school districts, and I can think of a few that are in here, that had very little AV, and they needed a higher tax rate to be able to compete on a level playing floor. So that all resulted in property tax reform. And when they implemented property tax reform, they also took away school districts' ability in their general fund to fund schools. The state took it over. And in their infinite wisdom, they thought it would be a good idea to go away from property taxes and also put property tax caps on, so that you could only raise so much money regardless of the demonstrated need. And that's kind of where we are today with property tax caps. So we're at 1%, 2%, 3%, depending upon whether you're a home, a farm, or a business, as to where the caps lay. But if you're a fast-growing school district, there's nothing you can do except accept the kids and provide educational opportunity through adequately staffed teaching force to educate those kids. But that doesn't mean that you have the AV to support that. And if you don't have the AV to support it, and you don't have the tax rate to support it, then you're in a mess. And a lot of school districts are hitting the caps, and many more will be hitting the caps very, very soon. And when you reach that point, you can't raise any more money. You're done. So that's the kind of thing that's going to force districts into thinking or doing a referendum, because that's the only means that they have of raising additional revenue. So, recently, we also had some additional changes in how we fund schools. And I think it was, I don't know if it was 3 years ago, 4 years ago, whatever it was. It seems like it was an infinite amount of time. But we had House Bill 1009 that changed how we did funding formula. And so we went from the 5 buckets of funding schools, 3 out of the 5 were property tax funded. And we combined all of those property tax funded entities into one. That's the operations fund today. And then the old general fund is what we now have as the education fund. The thinking behind that is it now allowed boards and superintendents to come to decisions about how much money they wanted to transfer between those funds, depending upon the need. Sounds easy enough, right? And then that wasn't good enough. The ink wasn't even dry on that legislation, and legislators started indicating that that needed to be limited to 15% of a transfer. Now, that was never discussed at any point in time when that legislation was introduced. I don't think it's necessarily enforceable. I think it's a recommendation, but it's also one of those items that is on the list of what we refer to as the naughty list. If you do any of those things, then you're going to get your hands slapped, and some of that may come out in the newspaper that you weren't fiscally responsible. Well, the contrary to that, you have been very fiscally responsible. I've known very few school districts that don't watch their money very, very carefully and use it as wisely as they possibly can for the benefit of the children that you serve. So to think and hear that school districts are not fiscally responsible is a ridiculous notion, because you all are. And you take that responsibility very seriously. I know you do. So to have legislators do those kinds of things kind of burns me up a little bit. Now we're in a situation that if we have a good economy, high employment, and people have income and the ability to spend money, sales and income tax, which drives our revenue, this can be pretty good. Now we're in a pandemic. People have lost jobs. The country is in a mess through no fault of anybody. But now, what are our sales and income tax revenues going to look like as a result of that? And that troubles me a lot, because you didn't do anything wrong. It's just the nature of what we have. So it's going to be interesting to see how this draws to a conclusion. Of course, the federal feds are putting a lot of money back into schools to help us all, and thank God for that. Very appreciative of that. And while I'm talking about that money, I know you all are, but I would urge you to carefully track how you're using that money and where it goes, because at some point in time, it would not surprise me to see some form of an audit about how we're using CARES Act money. So I know you're doing that, but it's just a little thing to put under your hat. I personally think that some of the thinking back then is that there was a lot of discussion about we have too many schools and we need to think in terms of consolidation. Well, anytime that C word was used, the wrath of a community would come down on whoever used it. So it was not a popular thing to be said publicly. So they backed off of consolidation, but I think there is an effort to starve schools financially. And they're looking at ways to do that. And I think that was one of the ends with sales and income tax funding schools. So charter schools, again, you've been around as long as I have. Charter schools were introduced in Indiana in 1999. The idea of charter schools was they were supposed to be part of a public school, and they were supposed to be incubators of innovation, so that if they did come up with an innovative idea, it could be replicated in other schools. Not a bad idea. Makes sense to me. However, when entrepreneurs found out that there was a significant amount of money to be made in the charter school space, they swept into the state as private charter school companies, and they had the money to lobby our legislators into talking them into pretty much what they wanted. And so that's why we saw a huge expansion of charter schools. And we also see that charter schools don't have the same accountability that public schools have. So it's a different set of rules. It's a different set of transparency. It's not a level playing floor. So as soon as these charter schools found, and by the way, and I happen to hear this personally, they testified, we can do it better and we can do it cheaper. So that was how they kind of got their foot in the door. We can do it better and we can do it cheaper. Now they're clamoring that we need more money. We don't have property taxes like public schools have. We need a portion of every school district's property tax. Disagree with that. We need a portion of any district that does a referendum. We need a portion of those referendum proceeds. No, you don't, because you didn't participate in the referendum. Those are the kind of conversations that if you don't know about are happening at our state house. And the lobbyists that the charter schools have are well paid, and they can make significant campaign contributions. And when you make significant campaign contributions, there are promises to be made and promises to be held. Just saying. Now, we're going to move into vouchers. So we didn't have vouchers for quite some time in the state of Indiana. And the introduction of vouchers was primarily for children and families of poverty. Oh my goodness, these poor kids need options for schooling. So they set up an income level and the regulations for how many children could participate in the voucher program. And that was all well and good. So some of those kids that needed choice and needed other opportunities with a voucher, that legislation was enacted. Well, it didn't take very long for those rules of the game to change pretty dramatically. And so where we are today is that the current poverty threshold for a family of four is $25,750. The threshold for House Bill 1005 for a family in poverty is $145,000. That threshold goes up to $174,000 in 22-23. Is that your idea of poverty? The only thing that is a saving grace, if you will, is that private and parochial schools only have so many seats. And if those seats are taken, there's no room left for vouchers to be offered. But I think what you're going to see is for many of these schools that that couldn't have additions made to their schools, they're making additions to their schools because this is a windfall for them. And early on in the voucher conversation, there were some folks up in the Fort Wayne area, which, by the way, is one of the areas that has a ton of charters and a ton of private and parochial schools. And I'm not going to identify, but there were some folks up there that said, oh, good, we can put new windows in the church and we can rebuild the steeple. What didn't have anything to do with education and kids is that they just now found themselves with a new opportunity for revenue. So to give you a little further perspective, we have 1,046,269,000 students in 1,992 K-12 public schools in Indiana with 55,547 teachers, or approximately 92% of Indiana students being served in our public schools. We have 47,041 students in 99 charter schools. We have 121,468 students in 796 private parochial schools. 77% of those are religiously affiliated. And these schools are primarily located in urban areas such as Indianapolis, Fort Wayne, South Bend, Evansville, and Merrillville. The point is that we have millions of dollars funneled into a few areas in the state serving the minority of the students in private and parochial schools. That's one of the things that really doesn't make any sense to me as to why House Bill 1005 is being offered. Millions of dollars are going into a few areas of the state. And I know most of your districts pretty well. Some of you probably have a charter school or private and parochial school, but most of you don't. So how is that fair and equitable for a few areas in the state to get the amount of cash that they're going to get and for you not to get any piece of that pie? So, I will say this, in all fairness, that at the beginning of, well, it was actually last spring, looking toward this session, I felt like given the pandemic and what I consider to be the revenue issues that were going to be associated with the pandemic, that if we got a flatline budget, that would be a win. And I stated that a couple of times to some of our superintendents. Fortunately, the governor came out early and said, we're going to fund education. And so I'm very happy about that. And I support the governor in his efforts to fund education. Our legislators have a different idea. And so to have a 1.5% and a 2% increase in school funding over the biennium is really a great thing. But to have another 3% of that money going into vouchers when we need it to fund our schools and to pay our teachers is just wrong. And the governor formed the teacher compensation panel. They came up with about 35 items that they would like to see schools take a look at to find additional money. Most of you have searched every cavern and every crack in your district to find that money and to support your staff and your teachers. And there's only so much you can do with what you have. But that teacher compensation panel really showed a light on how teachers are paid in comparison to other states. And we don't do very well. And that's one of the things that if you take the time to read Michael Hicks's article that came out today or yesterday, it really shines a light on that. And I'm not being disparaging toward any other state, but we're right there with Mississippi, and Mississippi's not very well funded and very well thought of as far as education is concerned. So do we want to race to the top or do we want to race to the bottom? And we really need to have a concerted effort. And if we're going to attract high quality educators in our state, we need to pay them, plain and simple. And when I was a superintendent, the lifeblood of my district and my main thoughts were, how can I put the best educators in front of my children? And that's what we do. That's why we do what we do, is to provide quality education for our kids. But you also have to have a way to pay them, to attract them and retain them. And we've got a lot of teachers leaving the field. We've got a lot of teachers jumping ship, a lot of teachers retiring early. And if we don't do something about that, we're going to be in serious trouble. Who's going to be interested in going into the profession? So, wow. Let's see here. In 2011, 2012, Indiana expended $15,514,024 for vouchers to serve low-income families. In 2019-20, that number expanded to $172,776,489. That's a big number in a short amount of time. That's in 11 years that it went from 15 million to 172 million. Now I think about what we could do with $172 million. That's about 3% new revenue. And that would be a great opportunity for us to do a lot of good in the state of Indiana. I'll also point to you that, well, let me say this before I get into that. How many of you are familiar with scholarship granting organizations, SGOs? I'm not surprised. SGOs is kind of one of those under the radar things, and SGOs were created for wealthy individuals or groups of wealthy individuals that put together organizations or foundations for tax credits. So these wealthy individuals can get a 50% tax credit, 50% tax credit for participating in the SGO program. And that amounted into $16,500,000 in 2021. So that's money diverted away from taxes that should be collected and siphoned away so that they can have a 50% tax credit. And you know there's a lot of people taking advantage of that. And the idea is that money would be used for scholarships for children in poverty. Well, it's not like our voucher program is not sufficient enough. We also have to find another way to take money out of our public school coffers and give it away. When Indiana opened school boundaries, that was another blow to how we do business, and allowing kids to just move from one district to the other made it very difficult to plan and budget. And so that was something that personally I opposed. I can see a couple of other people in here that were opposed to it as well. But schools of choice were other public schools. 47% of children selecting another school chose a public school. Just think about that. 30% selected a charter school, and 23% selected private parochial schools. How does that demonstrate the need to expand vouchers and charters? The data is right there. There is no need to do that. Public schools are the school of choice, period. The suggestion that vouchers save taxpayer dollars, I would like for you to note that 61% of the students who received a voucher last year never attended a public school. And that suggested fact that it created a new cost for the state of Indiana. Another concept entering the conversation was in Senate Bill 412. Now, Senate Bill 412 died last week. It did not get out of the Senate floor, fortunately. Now, 412 was for educational savings accounts. And we've fought educational savings accounts now for about at least the last 3 legislative sessions. There are a few states that have educational savings account, and basically what it is that you issue a parent a debit card with the idea that they find their own educational program and they pay for it with that debit card. Well, that debit card amounts somewhere between $5,000 and $7,000. There's no accountability. There's no oversight. There's no how did you spend this money. There's no justifying how you spent the money. It's just out there as an educational savings account. And in other states that have this, the abuse has been horrendous. I'm talking about big screen TVs. This is an educational entity that we need in our home for our children, and that's how they justify it. But the abuse could be rampant for that. Now, that's one of those bills that could resurface later in the session. And we're going to have to be careful to follow it to make sure that it doesn't come back up, because it very well could be placed in the budget and be buried someplace and not see the light of day. So it is due to many of the aforementioned attributes that we ask all of you to oppose 1005 and 413 and raise those objections to your legislators. The other thing I would ask is make sure your parents and your community know about it, because they probably don't. They have no idea about what's going on. I will close by saying that I appreciate your service to your communities and what you do. I appreciate you submitting the resolution, drawing up the resolution, and having this meeting this evening and having this conversation. To my knowledge, this is the only group assembled like this in the state of Indiana. A lot of school boards drew up the resolution, adopted it, and voted on it, and sent it to their legislators, which was great. But for you all to congregate this evening and collectively agree on this is fantastic. So I really appreciate that. I want to tell you how much I appreciate the leadership of your superintendents and your principals. This has been a very, very difficult strenuous year on our school leaders. And they didn't know which way to turn for a long, long time. Do we open? Do we close? Do we do hybrid? How do we do this? And so the new cliche word is pivot. How did you pivot? And you all did a marvelous job of pivoting and keeping your head up and doing what was best for your community and for your kids. And for the teachers, what you went through, believe me, we all appreciate it. You know, we can't walk a mile in your moccasins. We really don't know what you did and what you went through, but the fact is you continue to educate children, and you should be commended for that. So thank you very much for that. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here this evening, and I appreciate the opportunity to continue serving education in the state of Indiana. Thank you for your time.
ID sheets here. So much for color.
I've noticed a few of you are wrapping up in your coats. We did pay our bills this month. We just keep it cool. The next order of business will be hearing of patrons. I've got the corporations that are participating listed here. I'll call if you have someone from outside your board that would like to say anything here with you this evening. This would be the time. We can start with Benton Community School Corporation. Is there a teacher or a patron? Okay. Carroll Consolidated.
Good evening.
There you go.
Can you hear?
You can take the mask off. Okay.
Good evening. I am Elisa Brown, co-president of Carroll Education Association. I'm currently in my 5th year as an educator, and I feel so blessed that I get to teach at a rural Indiana public school. Our students enter our doors each day, and a world of opportunity awaits them. Our school holds our community together. It stands as a pillar of our beliefs, our hopes, and our dreams. Inside those walls, students explore their passions, ignite their interests, and create the foundation for a successful future for not only themselves, but our community. For the last 10 years, educators have been doing more with less. We have reached a breaking point. Our students are being negatively impacted by shortfalls in state funding. Specifically, House Bill 1005 gives a 23% increase to vouchers, while our public school students only get a 3% increase. On top of this, funding for high poverty students and English language learners is also being decreased. If these bills pass, what will this do to our communities? It's time that our state legislators put public education first. Our students matter. Our communities depend on it. Thank you to all of the board members, administrators, fellow educators, and community members who showed up tonight to show our legislators that we value our schools and we believe in their future.
Thank you. Delphi Community School.
had my eye on that podium. My name is Tim Connor, and I'm the president of the Delphi Classroom Teachers Association. I've been at Delphi Community School Corporation for 37 years, and I'm proud to be a part of it. When I came to Delphi, I was Tim Connor. I was Terry Connor's little brother and Ed Connor's son, but now I became Mr. Connor. I think that's the greatest gift the state of Indiana has ever given, was to be Mr. Connor. It is unfortunate that we are here tonight to gather to once again address the legislature's continued attack on Indiana public schools this legislative session. The legislature's funding choices have a negative impact on our greatest resource, our students. Indiana has a rich history of creating and supporting public schools dating back to our days as a territory. In the Northwest Ordinance of 1787, Article 3 states that religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and means of education shall forever be encouraged. If you look at the Constitution of 1816, it says, it shall be the duty of the General Assembly to encourage by all suitable means moral, intellectual, scientific, and agricultural improvement, and to provide by law for a general and uniform system of common schools wherein tuition shall be without charge and equally open for all. And I stress that, equally open for all. And we're not seeing that. So now I encourage everyone to contact your legislator. Now is the time for us to be heard. Tell them that our students deserve their best. Our schools and our administrators and our school boards are already giving them their best. Their parents are giving them their best. It's time that our legislature step up to the plate and give them their best. They need to ignore the outside influences of Apple and the Koch brothers and the Gates Foundation and the Walton Foundation that drive Hoosier education policies and funding formula. Hoosier parents, patrons, and communities and educators should be allowed to determine what is best for our students, our families, and our communities. Implore them to listen to our collective voice and protect our greatest natural resource, the children of Indiana. Thank you.
Eastern Pulaski Community School Corporation.
Good evening.
Good evening. I'm Kate Bailey. I'm the proud product of public education from the Eastern Pulaski school system. I sent all three of my children to Caston for their school system. I'm the president of Eastern Pulaski Teachers Association, and I've worked in public education for over 30 years. I believe in its mission with my entire heart. What I know, because I've seen it so many times, is that there's nothing more American than children being able to pursue their future through public education. It's truly the great equalizer. Small and rural schools are the lifeblood of communities. Taking funding that could be used by the schools to educate the vast majority of students to disproportionately fund vouchers for a minority of students is completely contrary to that ideal of America. I applaud the actions of this group, and I pray that legislators listen to our plea. Thank you.
North Newton School Corporation.
Good evening. My name is Tiffany Sinkowski, and I've been teaching for 21 years, the last 6 of these in the North Newton School Corporation. I would just like to say that on behalf of the North Newton Education Association, we are strongly opposed to the current legislation targeting Indiana's public schools. We have over 90% of Indiana's students and some of the hardest working people I know in our public schools. And for the life of me, I cannot understand how anyone can support this type of legislation. We, the teachers, are beyond tired, and we cannot and will not stand for these kind of attacks on our schools, our parents, our students, our teachers, and our staff.
Thank you. North White School Corporation.
My name is Jeremy Bowser. I am the president of the North White Classroom Teachers Association. First of all, we'd like to thank Mr. Eccles and the school board for putting this together, to bringing all of us together to oppose the horrible bills that are being proposed right now. House Bill 1005 and Senate Bill 413. We hope that we are tired of the legislators continually putting public education on the shelf. We'd like to also thank you for organizing this, bringing all of us together, this community, supporting students and public education. It is our hope that with the help of school boards like this, parents and invested community members, we can rally to have these bills defeated. Parents and community members, we need you to reach out to your legislators to help advocate for your children and the staff that supports them here. Continue to wear your red for ed on Wednesdays and tell people why. Don't just do it, explain why you do it. We have put together some flyers if you'd like to take one at the end of the evening with directions to complete 3 actions that will automatically send to your legislators. These are pre-drafted messages, but feel free to mention that you're a parent or community member. Doing all of them should take you less than 3 minutes. Thank you again for your support tonight.
Pioneer Regional School Corporation? None? Okay. Pardon?
We're good, thank you.
Okay. Tri-County School Corporation? Good. All right. Moving along. I will read the 2 resolutions. Each school corporation will make the necessary changes to reflect their own school corporation. I will read the information with North White School Corporation, the information included. First, agenda item 4.1.1, resolution opposing education savings accounts and voucher expansion. Whereas the Indiana General Assembly during its 2021 legislative session is considering House Bill 1005, Senate Bill 412, and Senate Bill 413, and other bills that establish education savings accounts and expand vouchers. Whereas the board has determined that the Indiana General Assembly should not enact education savings accounts or expand vouchers, and should continue to promote and fully invest in Indiana's public schools. More specifically, to further the public good, public funds should be invested in improving the schools designed to serve all children and to aid in improving Indiana public school teachers' salaries, as recommended by the Governor's Teacher Compensation Commission in its report of December 14, 2020. Whereas the cost of education savings accounts and school vouchers are covered exclusively by our state's school tuition support fund, further providing fewer dollars to fund our public schools and increase teacher salaries. Whereas the board believes that the public schools provide a strong educational environment for Indiana's children and education savings accounts. If enacted and expanded, school vouchers would put this environment at risk by directing resources away from those schools to non-public schools and or home schools that are not subject to the same rigorous scrutiny for their use of taxpayer resources. Now therefore, be it resolved, the school board of North White School Corporation opposes the passage and signing of House Bill 1005, Senate Bill 412, Senate Bill 413, or any other bill expanding vouchers and or creating education savings accounts approved this first day of March 2021, and that is 4.1.1. 4.1.2, a joint resolution between North White Classroom Teachers Association and North White School Corporation Board of Education in opposition to HB 1005, SB 412, and SB 413. Whereas the Indiana General Assembly during the 2021 legislative session is considering HB 1005, SB 412, and SB 413, bills that establish education savings accounts and dramatically increase funding for school choice scholarships. And whereas the aforementioned entities believe that such legislation divert much-needed resources from public schools. And whereas the entities believe that this type of legislation does not give choice to families but to non-public schools, as non-public schools can choose who they educate, and public funds should only be used for education that is open and inclusive to all Indiana students. And whereas the entities believe that public schools provide a strong educational environment for Indiana's children, while this legislation, if enacted, will put this environment at risk by directing resources away from the public schools to non-public schools, which are not subject to the same rigorous scrutiny for the use of taxpayer resources. Now, therefore, the entities strongly oppose HB 1005 and urge legislators to vote no to HB 1005, SB 412, and SB 413, and any other legislation that directs funding away from Indiana public schools. At this time, I'll be calling on each school corporation individually regarding the action items. Please state your motion on which agenda item or items you will be voting on tonight. Please also state your name if you make the motion or if you make the second. Each participating board will then vote on the agenda items and record those in favor and those opposed, and let us know the final vote. Please record how each board member votes on your record sheet. Prior to voting, there's a time that the board would like to make a statement on behalf of the entire board prior to voting. This will be done when you're called on for their school. I will begin with North White. I don't have a statement prepared because I've been a little busy, but I will make it. Do we have a motion?
Scott Williams, I make the motion. Josh Robertson, second.
I call for a vote. All signify by saying aye.
Aye.
We have a 7-0 for North White School Corporation. That's right, your motion has to be for one or both. Was that for both 4.1 and 4 point?
Yes.
Okay. Yes, please state it is for both. I'm sorry. So, Benton Community School Corporation.
I make a motion
Thank you. My name is Jennifer Barnes, I'm the president, and the Benton Community School Board of Trustees would like to thank our colleagues at North White for providing this forum and this opportunity. We believe that we are obligated by the demands of our elected office to represent the best interests of our voters, our taxpayers, our teachers and employees, and most of all, the students in our schools. We are pleased to join our rural neighbors in advocating public funds for public schools. May I please have a motion for both 4.1.1 and 4.1.2?
So I, Holly Stone, will make a motion for both.
I'll second. Chris Stoll.
All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. The motion passes 3-0.
Carroll Consolidated.
Hi, Eric Johnson, Board President. Board, we have the recommendation of the resolutions before us. I would entertain a motion.
I, Kyle Wagner, move that we accept both resolutions.
We have a motion
Ryan Hallball, second.
and a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye. Opposed?
Motion carries 4-0.
Delphi Community School Corporation.
There we go. All right, Mr. President, I have a little statement from our board and other community members. I want to first start by thanking everybody who attended here to express their concerns over public education funding. Why has it come to this point? It's not because individuals are not asking questions, but lawmakers not hearing us. But tonight, we unite to raise our voices as one. I'm a simple person, as most of you that know me. and I like to keep it simple. So with that in mind, there is one word that best describes this issue: discrimination. Harsh word, but true. Discrimination to public and rural schools. Let me just give a few examples of the injustice that our lawmakers are doing to us, and it's time to stop. We are held at higher expectations and far more mandates than non-public schools. But yet, non-public schools are getting more support from the state than we do. We take all children that walk through our doors, no matter race, economic status, or special needs. The others get to vet their students and even get to expel them and say, we can't service your needs. Unlike public schools, there is no accountability or monitoring that services are being given, or students' needs are being met, or due process is given. State mandates the testing for public schools. Unlike public schools, they get an option, whatever they want. You know that these needs are not very well being held accountable. Another area is like our guidance counselors. They're not required in non-public schools. The vital component of educating the whole child is missing. How are they servicing the social and emotional aspect of ensuring students are receiving their college or career training is crucial to their success outside of school. If a student returns to public schools after being in a non-public agency, that public school is left with the duty of picking up the missing pieces and held accountable if the children does not graduate on time, which does affect our funding. When I was doing some of the research, I came across a survey from Indiana. It shows that 7 out of 10 voters say public schools need more funding. While our state voucher program is the largest in the nation, and yet they want to increase it again, our pay ranks 40th in the nation. The state doesn't let us charge for tuition, but private schools on the average charge $10,000 per student for high school. I believe that if you gave a voucher program 100%, that 60% of the people still can afford to go to non-public schools. In fact, I look at that as another discrimination against those that are not able to come up with another 3,000 or 4,000. You are weeding out and creating a bigger gap for the rich and the powerful. If you're going to a voucher, why not give every child, school, community that attend public school the same dollars that you are supporting as a private school and the tuition that they charge? As I look at where the most non-public schools are at, they fall under the largest population areas. Votes, right? Again, they do not help our public schools. They discriminate. Discrimination, again, is why students of rural and public schools are penalized. The state is not supporting our students at the same rate as they do non-public schools. In closing, as I said in the beginning, discrimination. The Delphi School Board stands united with other schools on these resolutions, along with our teachers union. Board, in front of us, we have some business to take care of on the resolutions. Do I have a motion?
Yes, Tim Strasser, Mr. President. I make a motion that we pass both resolutions.
Thank you. Do I have a second?
Zach Owen, I second to pass both of them.
Thank you. We have a motion and a second for both resolutions. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Unanimous passed.
Thank you. Eastern Pulaski Community School Corporation.
Good evening. It is an honor to be among you all here tonight.
As president of the Eastern Pulaski Community Schools Board of Trustees, I would like to commend everyone in attendance this evening for your dedication and commitment to public education. All too often, we find concerning emails and calls to actions in our inboxes in regards to legislation that is being proposed by our General Assembly. Many times we shrug and we ask ourselves, what else can I do? What else can we do? And what else is it going to take to make our elected officials stand with public schools? What more will it require from us to receive the tools, funding, and support necessary for success? We are being forced to watch these things increasingly taken and redirected away from the many that stand to benefit and given to a select few. This unsustainable course can only be altered by making our voices heard. Tonight, we are making an even louder statement in an effort to change the path that we are on. I will end my remarks with a quote from the philosopher Plato, which states, "Your silence gives your consent." We cannot remain silent if we expect to be heard. It is our purpose as board members to speak up for what is best for our schools and what is best for our communities. And with that, I will ask my board for a motion of approval on both items 4.11 and 4.12.
Yeah, Jimmy Terry, move to advance both resolutions.
Beth Ruff, second.
I have a motion and a second. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries unanimously.
Thank you. North Newton School Corporation.
I'm Patricia Reyes, president of the North Newton School Corporation. I want to thank the North White Corporation for having this important meeting tonight, and to say that North Newton joins with all the other corporations here and around the state. And I make a motion that we approve the board resolutions 4.1.1 and 4.1.2. We have a motion and a second. All those, any discussion? All those in favor, raise your right hand and say aye. Okay, we have Paul Sheldon, Diane Gonzi, and Samantha Hickel voting virtual with us. So we have a unanimous or a quorum to vote, so it passes.
Thank you. Pioneer School Corporation.
Sorry, Rochelle Pearson. I make a motion to approve action items 4.1.1 and 4.1.2.
Minister, I second that.
All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. Motion carries. Voted 4-0.
Tri-County School Corporation.
Hello, on behalf of the Tri-County School Board and our superintendent, we wish to take this opportunity to thank the North White School Corporation, including North White Superintendent, Mr. Nick Eccles, and North White Board President, Mr. Jim White, for hosting this important event. Also, thank you to Mr. J.T. Koopman for providing important insight on the potentially damaging impact of House Bill 1005 and Senate Bill 413. As our Indiana legislators are proposing legislation under the guise of school choice, the Tri-County School Board encourages patrons to contact local legislators requesting our elected officials to vote no on House Bill 1005 and Senate Bill 413. Currently, the state of Indiana supports school choice through choice scholarships, tax credits, tax education for private schools, charter schools, innovation schools, and virtual schools. Indiana parents and students already have school choices, and over 90% of parents and students choose to attend public school. The current legislative proposals only serve to incentivize school choice, thus taking away taxpayer dollars from all public schools in Indiana when, as we all know, current school funding for public schools is already tight. All public schools in Indiana are required by Indiana code to report academic and fiscal information to the Indiana Department of Education and the Department of Local Government Finance. This data is available for all to view, including parents, local taxpayers, and state legislators. On the other hand, charter, virtual, and voucher schools are not required by law to report the same academic and fiscal data and are subject to less regulation and oversight. Due to this lack of oversight, charter, virtual, and voucher schools are ripe for corruption, as evident in the millions of dollars improperly given to virtual schools in Daleville in 2019. The Tri-County School Board Corporation urges lawmakers to invest in all public schools in Indiana by voting no on House Bill 1005 and Senate Bill 413. May I have a motion to approve the resolutions as stated, 4.11 and 4.12?
On behalf of, I make the motion that we approve 4.11 and 4.12.
Spencer Guide, second.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Motion carries 4-0.
Thank you. My tally shows all 8 participating school corporations have voted on both agenda items 4.11, 4.12, and have approved. I thank you all. Next, we're going to move on, and the boards that voted had time for a comment. I'd like to ask if any of the boards that are present would like to make a comment, starting with West Central. Nope, okay, thank you. Frontier?
I'm not the school board, I'm the superintendent. I was elected to speak. So first of all, thank you to everybody that's here tonight. It's been well stated tonight many times, but I would also like to point out that legislators will get these resolutions and say, that's nice. However, the people that are going to make the real difference are your constituents back home. And you need to go back home and encourage your taxpayers to contact their elected officials by phone, by email, and state they do not support Senate Bill 412, Senate Bill 413, or House Bill 1005. The 4 superintendents of White County last week issued a parent letter that we put on social media. We also sent it out by school messenger to all our parents. I would encourage all school boards to think about doing that for their patrons to contact their legislators. Thank you, and my school board will be considering these resolutions at their March meeting.
Thank you. Kankakee Valley School Corporation. None? Okay. Rensselaer Central School Corporation.
Go. Yes? Okay. I'm also not the school board, but I'm representing the Teachers Association as a patron. And we firmly believe that public education and its funding should be the #1 priority in the state of Indiana. Public education is where over 90% of our students are educated. And as we've learned tonight and in the past, that slowly been siphoned away. And at this point, public schools have been pushed to the breaking point. We have watched programs disappear, class sizes increase, and teachers leave the profession. Our rural schools in particular are the lifeblood of our communities. We provide the support and structure our families need. We provide the educational programs and the activities that prepare our children for the future, a future that includes being an active and engaged citizen in our community. What will happen if our rural communities no longer have the funds to keep our doors open? And where will families get the support they need? Where will children get the public education they have been promised? It's time for our legislators to honor that promise and to oppose all bills that support and expand the voucher system and the funding of private education. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Kurt Gregg, Superintendent of Rensselaer Schools. Public schools are the lifeblood of our rural communities, offering education, support, and activities for students and families. Public schools serve all children, have fiscal transparency, public oversight, and taxpayer accountability. House Bill 1005 and other proposed legislation seeks to expand programs that take public funds and shift them to non-public entities. These private entities are allowed to reject students and are not subject to accountability on how tax dollars are spent. This is not an issue of school choice. Students already have multiple options for receiving a quality education. The issue is the use of public tax dollars to fund private entities with no public oversight or accountability over how tax dollars are spent. Over the last 20 years, Indiana's teachers have seen the smallest salary increase of any state in the nation. The Governor's Commission to investigate teacher salaries noted that Indiana's teachers are the lowest paid in surrounding states. House Bill 1005 and other proposed legislation would funnel even more money away from public schools. In support of our public schools, Rensselaer Schools opposes the passage of House Bill 1005 and any other legislation that diverts money from public to non-public entities.
Thank you. Twin Lakes School Corporation. Nobody? Okay. That means it's my turn to talk. I'd be remiss if I didn't thank Mr. Eccles for pulling this together for us. Our central office staff, Emma and Karen back in the back for getting all the paperwork pulled together. Mr. Land, our technology, Mr. Scott, our lights and sound. Our building administrators, Mr. Griles and Dr. Dean, and our National Honor Society for providing mics and cookies and water, and just being nice people for us. I'd like to thank, the teachers that are here tonight. I appreciate you coming out. I'd like to thank all the board members, the superintendents. I know this was short notice. We pulled it together as quick as we could. The COVID scare, and Dr. Koopman saying, superintendents have been busy. Well, Mr. Eccles and I have been connected at the hips since last March. We meet more times a week on what's going on than you do want to think about, and I'm sure many of you do as well. Last thing I will do before I dismiss you is I'd like to give Dr. Koopman a couple gifts. Since you're a North White past alum, and you're twice the alum, and you're the teacher, a couple North White mugs to get you home. Once again, I thank you all for coming. I appreciate your participation. Hopefully we can do this again sometime. It's kind of nice seeing everybody. As you leave, the Honor Society will help you out the doors, and they will help you out the doors because we need to keep moving because of COVID-related items. If there's no further business, no one has any other comments, this meeting's adjourned. Thank you.